Good Monday morning, everyone. This is Reverend John HUC-JIR, Ward AME Church, and we are continuing in our Monday morning interview series. This Monday, we're very grateful to have Dr. Joshua Holo, the Dean of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, Jack H. Skirball campus in Los Angeles. That's just down the street from us at Ward AME Church. He is an associate professor of Jewish history, and he has written, edited, and contributed to numerous works on Jews of the medieval Mediterranean. He co-founded HUC's digital learning platform called the College Commons and hosts a regular podcast called College Commons Podcast. Josh, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me. It's such a pleasure to spend time with you, John, and to have a conversation such as we've already had. I know it's going to be a blast for me. I am a medieval Jewish historian, as you said, so I tend to have the long view, and I think that'll come out in some of our give and take as an attitude. And on a personal level, I'm a very proud heir to both streams of the major populations of American Judaism, Sephardi, the Spanish Jews, and Ashkenazi, the Eastern European Jews. And my wife is Brazilian, which means we spend a lot of time in Brazil, and my kids speak Portuguese. And so the Latin American thing is a big part of my life, in addition to the Latin component of my Judaism and the more well-known Eastern European part of my Judaism. So I like to mix it up, and I think I enjoy a rich conversation.
Well, I am looking forward to this as well. And let me start with our first question. It's kind of long. In the background behind the current concerns of pandemic and protests is the recognition that we are in the age of fake news. There are very few issues in the public discourse where objective facts are acknowledged. With respect to COVID-19, in the light of 125,000 plus Americans dead, there is a fear that we're in the midst of the worst global pandemic in 100 years and need to take significant action, while at the same time, there's a sizable plurality of Americans who say it's just the flu and reject taking any precautions. Similarly, there are protesters who claim that excessive policing of Black and brown people is an epidemic, while there are folks on the other side who claim that the data show that Black and brown people are policed appropriately. With all of the confusion and obfuscation going on, how do people of faith discern what is true and determine correct responses?
Well, first of all, before I answer that question, I'd like to take your listeners and viewers' patience for a minute and frame what I have to say, because I have a bias. And I learned a wonderful principle from the great pioneering journalist Gwen Ifill about truth.
A good AME, by the way.
Really, there you go. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. It wasn't planned, friends. I promise you. The Gwen Ifill, an amazing journalist and person, really an amazing person, spoke about objectivity in journalism. You know, journalism presumably prizes objectivity, and she said, you know, objectivity probably isn't the gold standard, and it's probably not even attainable because we all have our biases. But just because you can't be objective doesn't mean you can't be fair. And that's sort of my goal. My goal is to not pretend that I'm objective. I have my own take on the truth, and I have my biases and my preferences, and I bring those with me. And I try to name them because I want to live up, or try to live up, to Gwen Ifill's standard of fairness by revealing my own biases so that whoever talks to me can engage with the full complexity of my opinions and also call me out if I need to get called out. Now that's embedded into the problem that you've posed, because your question poses this deeper problem of, it's not just that, you know, Reverend John HUC-JIR brings his biases and Joshua Holo brings his biases, but we can talk them out and we can come to some shared understanding. In America, what you're signaling in your question, John, is much deeper, that there are basic underlying functional truths that we don't agree on. And they're life and death. They're life and death for the lives of Black people being killed by the police. Their life and death for people who are dying in hospitals without the benefit of their loved ones being able to come in. These are extremely high stakes problems of truth. So, and I'm a person of faith like you, and I bring my own biases about faith. And the truth is that I actually see faith and truth as wrestling in an irreconcilable paradox. And so I think the challenge is to figure out how they can help each other. It's not obvious to me. And I'll tell you what the problem is before I tell you what I think the positive solution might be. I see faith and truth as in tension with one another because, on the one hand, faith, by definition, makes very, very broad claims on the truth. In fact, in general, especially in the monotheistic world, faith makes monopolistic claims on the truth. Let's just look at our shared framework, which is monotheism. Monotheism is very monopolistic. It doesn't just say to John HUC-JIR and Joshua Holo, who already agree on monotheism, that there is one God for the entire universe, because that's our bias. We're predetermined to already agree on that. But the monotheistic proposition goes to other people who may not be monotheistic, who may be either polytheistic or atheists or whatever else. And monotheism says, well, you know what? Just because you don't believe in one God, the one God is still your God. That's an aggressive imposition of belief onto people that's embedded in our belief. That's because faith has a very strong truth claim component built into it. So on the one hand, faith and truth are really wedded in faith's own mind. On the other hand, however, faith and truth are completely irreconcilable because there is no way to test faith. There's no demonstration, no illustration that I can present to somebody else that definitively proves my faith or anybody else's faith. And anyone who is a person of faith knows this, because you're really charged with your faith and you love it and you want to talk about it, and people will listen to you respectfully and hear out your arguments, and they're still going to say, fine, but I don't agree. And there's nothing you can say. You just disagree. There's no proof. There's no test. There's no nothing. And in that sense, faith can only grasp at truth, but it will always be slipping from the fingers of faith because there's nothing you can really do with it. So that tension between faith's claim on truth and its inability to hold truth is extremely problematic. So as a person of faith, I struggle with that. So the question you've raised is, all right, well, how can faith help us in this civic conversation, these politics, this culture, public safety? How can faith make us have better access to a shared truth that we can live better with as a society? And here's what I think the answer is, or at least one answer. I'm sure there are many. I think that one thing that faith does do is it requires wonder. Faith is born in the moment of drinking in the vastness, the complexity, the beauty, and the incomprehensibility of this wild and wonderful universe. And in this way, that wondrous feeling that faith is spilling over with, faith presupposes humility and a desire to participate. These are the raw ingredients of faith, but they're also the raw ingredients of curiosity. And that's what I think faith brings to the search for truth. It brings that wondrous, humble desire to participate, this curiosity that causes us to ask questions, and it puts us in a position to seek goals that share this greater thing that we want to be a part of. If we approach all of these problems with that kind of humble curiosity, not owning the truth, but together working to get at the best functional truth because we're people of faith and that's part of our personality, then I think faith can advance the conversation about finding meaningful truths for our society to go forward.
It's interesting. I had a mentor who once said, the key to being an effective faith leader is not to be childish, but be childlike and retain that sense of wonder, that a child has upon learning a new thing, and that is that's a great take you have on that from our faith perspective. Um, as an historian, you know that there have been times in America where the Black Christian community and the Jewish community, both religious and secular, walked closely together on social and economic issues. My grandfather was a Baptist preacher who ended up on the enemies list of the House Un-American Activities Committee because he hung out with a radical Jewish rabbi in Cleveland. There have also been times where there has been an apparent chasm between the two communities. In the 21st century, is it possible for these two communities to recreate or reinvent the relationship that existed in the first half of the 20th century?
So first of all, you ask a very insightfully posed question, and I want to break it down, and then I want to not answer it, give a preface, and then answer it, because I'm a Jew, and that's the way we go. You know, we make trouble where it was perfectly fine, and there didn't need to be any trouble. So I don't think we can recreate it, but I do think we can and must reinvent it. So you asked those two questions, and I'm going to go back to why I think we can't recreate it and why we must reinvent it. But before I do that, in the spirit of Gwen Ifill, I want to share with you and your listeners and watchers what I think is really, really important for us to name and to own and to think about. And it is the following. We all know about the term white fragility, right? We understand what that is. Well, there is, in my opinion, a phenomenon going on as we speak of Jewish fragility in relation to the Black community. And here's what I mean. The Jews overwhelm, you know, you can hear all kinds of information about Jews, left, right, center, and all that, but still, it is a fair statistical generalization to talk about American Judaism overwhelmingly in the between the 70s and 80s in percentages, you know, on all the key issues, gun control, abortion rights, gay marriage, you name it. We are still a liberal population. This is just true. We're overwhelmingly democratic. Now, of course, there are varieties of opinions and there's a spectrum but in a healthy majority, we remain recognizably left of center. Okay, that's just a preface. Okay. Together with that makeup of the American Jewish population, which still exists today, many, I would say the vast majority of American Jews remember with great pride and great affection and great moral commitment our siblinghood with the Black community during civil rights and in general supporting, for example, in Los Angeles, the alliance between Jewish LA and Black LA when we elected our first Black mayor. This was part of the story of LA, and we were very proud of that. We continue to be very proud of that. Here's what I mean about the fragility part. I think that we Jews today still want to be that righteous ally to the Black community. But I think the Black community, in a larger proportion than in the past, perhaps, this is my impression, so I'm not speaking sociologically, I'm speaking as a partner having a conversation. It is my impression that the Black community is not as comfortable with the Jewish community as it used to be in general. I think it tends to see the Jews as whiter than the Black community used to see us in the past. Here's the fragility part. We, who remain a very middle class and up minority, the Jewish community, in our white privilege, our feelings are hurt that the Black community doesn't necessarily instinctively feel the alliance that we feel with you. That hurts our feelings. Now that's classic white fragility. When the powerful party feels fragile and like, oh, poor me, that's classic white fragility right there. I mean, it's more benign. It's certainly not, built on a kind of aggressive desire to exclude. So it's not the worst case scenario. but it needs to be named that the Black community is evolving in ways that views the Jewish community differently than we, the Jews, are used to. And our feelings are hurt. So when Selma came out, the movie, and Abraham Joshua Heschel, who cited the term radical wonder, which I was referring to before about that quality of faith, who walked with Martin Luther King Jr. and who said, it felt like my feet were praying, and who in his rabbinic beard, represented the very essence of the Jewish-Black alliance. When the movie Selma came out, and it didn't include, I think, anything about the Jewish community support for the Black community, the Jewish community was kind of wounded and felt left out, felt sort of like, but what about us? And I do think that that's Jewish fragility of sorts, and I think we have to get past that. And I say we, meaning the Jews. I don't mean you and me, John. I mean, that's like the Jewish community has to get past that, and it has to understand exactly. And now, here we come. I'm actually going to answer the question, finally, after time. That's why I think we have to reinvent rather than recreate. Recreate goes back to a version of American Judaism and Black America that just isn't the reality anymore. In the 60s, institutionalized anti-Semitism was much stronger. It loomed much larger. And our intimacy with the Black experience, though not the same, even then at all, I mean, not at all, but it was more institutionalized repression that we were aware of in our own experience that we could use to identify with the Black experience. And that was, I think, more evident to the Black community as well. Now, institutionalized anti-Semitism is not really the major problem. Anti-Semitism is on the rise. It is a problem. Don't get me wrong. I am not diminishing the power and the horror of anti-Semitism worldwide and in the United States going up. However, it tends to be hate crimes. It tends to be a different kind of attack rather than institutionalized exclusion and disenfranchisement. So that's very, very different. And I think that we need to own that and realize we can't recreate that movement on the basis of that kind of mutual understanding, because it's sort of not really operative anymore. But there are other really interesting things going on in the Jewish community, and I'd love to hear what you think is going on in the Black community, that do encourage us to recreate a powerful alliance of minorities that stand for justice and righteousness and the advancement of all Americans. And it is this: the ethnic makeup of American Judaism is much more of a rainbow than it used to be. We are more keenly aware of the worldwide makeup. See, American Jews are almost all, and certainly in the 60s, were almost all descended from Eastern European and Central European immigrants from the late 19th and 20th century, overwhelmingly. Even people like me, who are only half of that group, and the other half is from Sephardic Jews, Spanish Jews from the Mediterranean, still, in the way I present myself, I still present as white. So that's the overwhelming majority of Jews, even more back in the 60s. Now, since the 70s, with rising rates of intermarriage, adoptions, and generally also different flavors and colors of Jews coming to America from Israel, the American Jewish population is slowly beginning to mirror the world Jewish population, which is much more of an ethnic rainbow. And I think that that's an interesting, rich, beautiful challenge to the American Jewish community to ask the questions of what it means to engage with communities of color, knowing that we have Jews of color in our own midst and that they are a vibrant part of our community, shaping our sensibilities and questioning our assumptions in completely productive and challenging ways that can allow us to reapproach the Black community with the personality of the 21st century that has shaped American Jews, and the new emerging personality of Black America, now being shaped as you and I speak in this very moment of civil and human rights struggle in the streets for weeks now. I mean, it's an amazing moment. So I know that there are many, many Jews, in fact, all the Jews I know, who are eager to reinvent an alliance of conscience, political strength, and shared purpose, shoulder to shoulder with the Black community, to build an America of opportunity and promise for all Americans. And that you and I should be talking together is just a tiny, tiny, tiny signal in that direction, in addition to our shared friends that we can work together with to make that happen.
It's interesting. You made the supposition that, you know, perhaps Black Americans feel that the Jewish community is whiter than it is. You and I know some rabbis together who think that the issue is that the Jewish community feels that it's whiter than it is.
Right.
but you know, it's always a matter of perception and a matter of.
That's and I can assure you, as a Latino Jewish household, we've had some pretty crazy conversations at my table. I'll tell you, it gets. Look, there are even problems in the Latino community about whether or not Brazilians count as Latinos. Mm-hmm. So, like, mix it up, and you get an American story. I find it beautiful and rich, but most importantly, John, it engenders empathy and identification with other people. I love that. I want more of that. I just think it's so rich and it makes me a better person. It stretches me, and the friendships that we can forge can change the country.
I agree. Moving on, there's a sense of ennui in some people as quarantines are extended or reimposed in some areas. There are financial strains, relationship strains, emotional and other strains that are pushing people close to the edge. As a faith leader, what advice do you give to those in your circle to make it through the stressors of the current time?
To me, that's a great question, and it's one of the few questions that I can give a straight answer to after all this back and forth. Above all, first and foremost, the power of faith is to connect. There are only two institutions in not just American life, but in the human condition that I think have the power to connect like none other: religion and education. And I think we need to be leveraging those things. And indeed we are. We have so many classes going on in Zoom, but we also have our services in churches, synagogues, mosques, and prayer centers around the country and the world using technology to connect. And I think we need to leverage our faith and the call of faith, and people who share it, or people who are just curious, or people who are just showing up, doesn't matter, to connect. And not just to connect around ideas, although obviously I made a career out of ideas. I'm a professor, that's what I believe in. But faith communities, I want to stress the community part, that it's not just about sharing ideas, it's about sharing people, lives, connection, that we have to work extra hard at because of the imposed distance of social distancing. We are social mammals. We need each other. We need to share in each other's experience and to be in each other's presence as much as possible. And faith is one of the great, powerful tools to get us to show up and exercise that connection so that we can stay healthy and strong and rooted in our best selves.
Now, off topic real quick. You're married. How long you been married?
20, going on 25 years.
So I'm going on the 25 years. I'm a little over 26. How is the enforced the enforced time together with the family helpful for the marriage, or is she ready for you to go to the office a little more?
It's actually complicated. As I said, my mother-in-law, well, my wife is from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, the very heart of the city. And she's an only child, and her mother is a widow living in Rio de Janeiro. So we made a family decision that my wife would stay with her mother as long as there was a risk of vulnerability to take care of her mom, and that I would stay with our two kids, 19 and 16, here in LA. So we have different challenges, actually. We have the challenge of my poor children being prisoner to their dad alone, which it's bad for the Jewish people. I'm telling you, it's not a winning proposition, but they're holding in because they're good kids. But it's, my wife and I have suffered the enforced separation of a globe between us, half a globe, and without, by the way, knowing when she's coming back, because there's the political parts about coming back and forth across countries, but there's also the basic issue, which is my mother-in-law's health. So, and she remains healthy, thank God. My family remains healthy, but it's been very challenging, and it's been very challenging not to know when we're going to be reunited.
And, having been to Brazil, in fact, the AME Church is just reopened 100 churches in the northern part of Brazil that closed after the coup in the 1960s. It's not the most stable place to be. And so I know there's got to be some fear in the background. And so we are praying God's blessings on your wife and her mom.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And really for your kids. I mean, gee.
Right, they're the vulnerable ones, man, I'll tell you.
So let me ask one more question, Josh. What does it look like when America is great again in your eyes?
Well, I don't like to say make America great again, because I don't like there's a lot of reasons why I don't like the phrase, going back to my biases and being transparent about them in the spirit of Gwen Ifill. But the reason today I want to say that I don't like the phrase is because of the word again. And this goes back to recreating the Black Jewish Alliance versus reinventing the Black Jewish Alliance. I don't want to look backwards to previous generations of America to look for greatness. It's not that there wasn't greatness there. Of course there was. But I don't need to look to segregation, to slavery, to the genocide of Native Americans, or even to the founding fathers and the glorious, wonderful things that did happen. I want to look forward. I want to use the best of those ideas from the past as tools to look forward, to make America great. And what I want is, I want to look forward to an America that is always ambitious and restless to improve and to live up to the ideals that we share. And today, as I'm answering your question, I'm thinking of the motto of the United States of America, which is a pluribus unum, out of many, one. And that's the ideal that I want to carry forward to create an ever greater America. So out of the many, one to me means that we celebrate the many in the form of curiosity, of goodwill, and of faith, to learn from those that are different from us, to approach every relationship in a way that says, hey, I can learn from you. It's worth my while to sit down, have a drink, and talk and learn from you. I want citizens to feel that way about each other because we're different. I love the difference. I think the differences make us richer, stronger, more varied, and more creative in our ideas and our thinking. I love that. I love walking down our shared city, John, of Los Angeles, and hearing the 100 languages spoken from around. I love it. It makes me deliriously happy. And I want to learn, and I want everyone to learn from each other. And that's the plural part of a pluribus unum. And the unum part, the one part, the unity part, is that whenever we approach other people, I want us to engage that curiosity with the presupposition, the assumption that we're asking questions and learning from each other for the sake of a shared destiny. What matters to me matters to you. What happens to you matters to me. It's not just curiosity in the abstract, like, oh, I'm an intellectual guy who likes to ask questions. It's that I need to learn from you because I want to live with you, and I want to live well. And I want you to rise so I can rise, and I want to rise and rise with you. That's the unum part of A pluribus unum. And that's the ambition and the forward looking work, frankly, that we Americans have to do. Because if this time has taught us anything, there are things we can do really well. And for all of our suffering over COVID, I look around us in Los Angeles, I see a lot of people complying, a lot of people really doing their best. But I also I see entirely necessary protests on the street for our failures in this regard, and the violence and the harm and the death that our inability to have a shared destiny causes. So I want us always to aim for that ideal and to do the hard work of moving the needle. You know, in Hebrew, we have a saying that we cite all the time. It's by a rabbi named Rabbi Tarfon, and he said this about 2,000 years ago, a little bit less. He said, you know, it's not your job to finish the work. Nobody finishes the work. Life is complicated and it goes on long after you're dead. You can't finish the work. But just because nobody expects you to finish it, that doesn't mean that you're allowed to stop trying. You don't have to finish it, but you always have to work towards it. We are never free from that obligation. So that's what I want to work towards. I want to make America ever greater, not great again.
Well, that's wonderful. It reminds me of a saying from another mentor of mine: America should not strive to be a melting pot, but a salad bowl, where
There
you
you
can be the radish, I can be the tomato, my wife can be the avocado, your wife can be the radicchio, and
go.
retain our individual qualities, but together making a wonderful experience. I want to say thank you to Dr. Joshua Holo, who is not merely an administrator, but is also a scholar. And I've asked him some questions in his area of expertise. We appreciate your time of sharing with us, and want you to know that if we had more Joshua Holos, we'd have a better world. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
That's to you, John. Thank you.